What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. In the past few videos, we were setting up our user authentication. So at this point, we now have users able to log into our app. Now that we have a user logged into our app, we want to actually be able to tie their individual trips to that user. So let me show you a little bit quickly what this means. Before we just had a feed of kind of all, or before we weren't even pulling data from Firebase, we just had random data in here. Now these trips are actually related to our individual user. What this means is if we have this user right now, which I'm logged in as, if we create a brand new trip for them and we could do anything, and we'll just leave the default here, and we actually aren't setting a budget yet, so it's just going to say nothing. You'll see that new trip is right here. Again, that budget's not set, which is fine, but this is now these three trips are related specifically to this user. So if we were to log out of the app right now and then sign in as an anonymous user, just create a new user account, no trips are going to be there for this user. And that's because this user, that's exactly what we want. This user should not be seeing the trips for that other user that was just logged in. But if this user is to create a if this user is to create a new trip and completes it, now that trip is going to be here for this user. So the app at this point is going to be working quite a bit more like we want it to work. And now that all that work that we did with the user authentication is going to start paying off here because we keep each user's data separate. All right, perfect. Let's get started. All right, so if you remember in our app here, we can create a trip for a user, but in Firebase right now, all that data is just getting stored all under this one trips collection here, and they're all randomly throughout here. We have really no way right now of determining what user uploaded each of these trips. So we're going to restructure the format of this data in Firebase, and we're going to divide it out by user using that user ID, which you can see back in our auth over here. So this is getting uploaded in our trip view here. So again, we'll do Boston for this one. We'll leave the dates at the defaults. This page right here is actually where we're making that Firebase call. So we're going to find that in our new trips folder, and it is the budget view. In here where we're making that Firebase call, we're actually just going to update that slightly to use that user ID now that we have. So first, let's actually just get that user ID as a variable. Let's create a new function actually in our auth services. So let's just create a quick function that will get in return the user ID from Firebase auth. So we can do this kind of closer up to the top. So again, this is going to be a future. We're going to return the string value of the UID, and we'll say get, we'll call this get current UID. So it'll get the current user's user ID. This will be asynchronous, obviously. And this pretty simply is just going to get a UID value as a string, which we'll do with await Firebase auth of the current user of the, actually that will get wrapped, and then once we get that current user object, we can just call UID on it. And then let's just go ahead and return that UID. Perfect. Actually, yeah, that works like that. I suppose we could just return this and delete that, make this a one-liner. Perfect. So now we can use this get current UID back in our budget view. We will have to import our provider so that we could call our authentication method, and then with that provider auth instance, we can call that new function we just created. So go ahead and import that provider that we created. And if you're just coming into this video right now, all of these have been covered in previous videos. So you could either just download the code, which is going to be linked below, or you can go follow along and get caught up to this position in the app building process. But anyway, now that we have our provider, down here we're going to get an instance of that provider. So we can make this a final, and we can just call this the auth. Actually, let's just call this the UID because we're going to do this in one call. And this will be a wait function because it's going to be asynchronous. And we're going to want to make sure we get this UID before we make our Firebase call. So for this, we're going to use that provider, get the context of it, get that instance of our provider auth. And then once we have that, we can call our get current UID, which is the function we just created. All right, now that we have a UID of our current user, we can update this call to actually, instead of calling that collection trips, let's just call it user data. And then after user data, we're going to create a new document and we're going to call it that UID. So we're going to have a collection of all the users, and each user will have one document which is named their UID. And then within that document, we're going to create a collection which we'll call trips here. And then that new trips collection is going to get that, that new trip added to it. So pretty much, I guess this part's the same, starting with trips. This end part is the same. We're just going to sort it earlier by the, instead of calling trips on the outside, we're going to call user ID first and then give it the document ID there. Let's see. This will make sense once you see it in Firebase. So now that this is saved, let me hit finish here, and that should update our user with this new structure. So if we refresh the Firebase console, you'll see we have this new collection now, which is called user data. And then we have that one user, which is the user that I'm currently logged in as. And then that now has a collection called trips, and then it has the one trip that I just created, which was Boston. Perfect. So this is exactly what we want for uploading the trips now. If I were to log out of this and, sign in as an anonymous user, then I can, add another trip and just leave the defaults there and finish. Now we're going to, in Firebase, have a second user here. There it is. And it will have that trip by itself. For Florence. So this keeps them separate, which is exactly what we want. We don't want users to be able to access each other's trips. Perfect. So now actually let's go ahead and modify our homepage so that it doesn't display this fake data and it actually displays a user's trip data. So go to our home view, which is actually the view over here. And as you can see, we just have this this list of trips right now. We're actually not going to need this anymore, so we can just comment it out or completely remove it. You'll see we are still calling that list, and that's actually going to completely change. So first thing, let's go ahead and make sure we have our imports. We're not going to need this trip import anymore, so we can remove that. I will actually just go ahead and delete this, get it out of the way, because we're definitely not going to need it. Let's see, there's going to be two new imports we're going to need now. We're going to need the Cloud Firestore, and we're going to need that provider. Cloud Firestore we're going to need so that we can access Firebase. The provider we're going to need so that we can access the current user's ID. All right, now the next thing we can do is we're going to be modifying this list view builder right here. So right now we were using that trips list that we just deleted to build out this list. We're actually going to now wrap this in a stream builder, and then with that stream builder we can feed in our Firebase data. The reason we're going to use a stream builder here is because if a user adds a new trip, we want to be basically listening to that Firebase user specific data, and if they have a new one added, we want to immediately just add it to the list. So wrap this list view builder in a stream builder. Most of this now is pretty much set. We just need to add a stream for this. We could add this right here, but since we actually need to do two different calls, we are going to create a new function that is going to return our snapshot. And the two calls are going to be, one, we're going to get the user's current ID, and then two, we're going to get that Firebase data, which is the user's trip data. So let's go ahead and do this first, and then we'll come back and fix the builder down here. So for this, we're going to just right below, let's just create a stream. Well, this is going to be a function that returns a stream of query snapshot. And the query snapshot is actually going to be what Firebase is returning when you make a call to the Firebase Firestore database. So here we're going to be getting the users, trips, streams, snapshots actually. So we'll call this, be a bit wordy, but get users, trips, stream, snapshot. And I think it's best to, or I mean, I always like to keep the function names as descriptive as possible. So this, when you read it, you know exactly what it's going to be doing. This is actually going to need to take that build context because our provider is going to need the context. And this is going to be asynchronous, but we're going to actually use async star. The reason that we're going to use this async star is so that we could, instead of just awaiting and returning, we can actually use the keyword yield, which is going to allow us to add new elements to our stream when they're available. So that's basically going to allow this stream to kind of stay open or stay listening to. And I mean, I guess that's one way to look at it. But the star here is really going to just allow us to keep adding to that stream as we need to. So firstly, let's get the user's ID. So this is going to be similar to how we just did it back in the last file. We're going to be awaiting for that provider. And we're going to take that context, which is going to be passed into this function, auth, and then we'll get the user's ID. All right. Now that we have the user's ID, we can get the user's data from Firestore, and we're actually going to use that yield that I was just talking about, actually yield star, because what we want to do is in this asynchronous function, we want to yield out, which is, you can kind of think of this like returning, but for a stream, we're going to return back the data for that user, that trip data. So let's see, for this we need a Firestore instance. Then we're going to call the collection of user data. And then we'll get the document of the UID. This is very similar to what we did when we were uploading. And then we're going to get that trip collection, or trips rather. And then we're going to just call snapshots on this, and that will get us the data from Firestore for these trips for our current user. All right, so this stream here, we're going to call up in our stream builder, and we just need to give this the context. All right, great. Now, when this stream builder first starts, there's not going to be any data returned initially, like at the very initial point of it. So let's actually handle that with an if statement here, and we can say if the snapshot does not have data, which this exclamation point is basically negating what this says. So if snapshot has data, this is doing the opposite of it with that exclamation point. So if the snapshot does not have data, we're just going to return for now we can just return a loading constant as text. Now we can update this. In a previous video, we used a spinner class. We can update that to be a spinner instead, but I'm not going to go over that right now. Then down here for our item count, we no longer have this trip list, so we're going to actually just go ahead and delete that. But we do now have this snapshot, and the snapshot contains all our data as data actually from Firebase. Each element of data is a document in here, so we can call documents, and then length on that. Now, what I mean here, the documents are in Firebase here of our trips. You'll see right now we just have one document. If we were at another document here, that's what we actually want to count, because those are our trips. So each trip is represented in Firestore as a document. All right, so That should be all set. Then I guess the last part down here is with this item builder. How we were building this before is the build trip card actually already had access. It was accessing the trip list and we were just giving it the index. Instead, we're going to actually give it the snapshot data for the document, but the document at the index. So we're going to give our build trip card each individual document one at a time as we go through the indexes. Now we're going to need to update this, and this is going to take, instead of an index here, is going to take a document snapshot. And we can just call this the document. Then we need to update the way we're calling the data. So the trip is actually, okay, the trip is actually going to be the document. So let's just call this the trip, because this is now represented by that document snapshot. So we can actually just delete that. And when we call trip, we can't actually use the dot notation here, but we can use the trip of title like that. So just go ahead and change these to be accessed like this. And that's just because this is the way that Firestore is returning the data as JSON objects. All right, now we can go ahead and save this. And we are getting a error. So let's see. Okay, and that's actually just because of a typo right here. This should be snapshot data of documents, not document. And okay, that now we have another error, which is that the timestamps are not of type datetime. And that's actually because Firebase stores our dates as Firebase timestamps, and we are using them here as dates. So we can just actually go ahead and convert these to date. And I think there was another, yeah, the start date and end date just convert to date. And then we're converting those to strings as well. Let's see. ToString as fixed was called on null. The reason for this error is because our budget here is actually null right now. So there's a few ways we can do this. One way is that we would make sure that the budget is never null when we upload it. So we wouldn't upload a null value, we would just upload 0. That's one way to handle it. Another one is, if we call this and it ends up being null, do something different. So for right now, we can do that. So we really want to just check if this trip budget here is null. We can do that. We can do a shorthand if statement here. So if that is null is what we want to see. So if that equals null, pretty much we would want to return, we can just do in/a for now, which means that there's really no budget, which now I'm seeing this has to be in quotes, and we'll just do an in/a. And then if it's not null, we'll just give that budget. All right, there you go. You can see the null, you can see the NA because our budget is empty. Let's go ahead and open up our Firebase console. And we must be this user right now. And let's just go ahead and change that budget actually to be a number value, which we can do 200. And now if we go back into our project, you'll see the $200 value is there. All right, perfect. So if we are to add another trip in here, so let's say we do DC, and we could change the dates if we want. Hit continue, finish that. Again, we don't have it set up to be adding our budget in, so it's not quite working with that right now, but that's just because I haven't written that code yet. All right, great. So now we're pulling users' specific data about their trips from Firestore, and now users do not have access to other people's data, which is exactly what we want. The app is really starting to function more like the app that we want, which is great. And with those fundamentals of using Firebase Firestore to upload data and retrieve data, we can really start getting deeper into the app process of building it itself. All right, ciao for now.